right. We are excited for another fantastic session here at Demo HQ Day. It is such a pleasure to introduce these two gentlemen talking about demystifying the demo landscape with Gilad Avidan, the Chief Product Officer at Demostack, and Kerry Sokalsky, the founder and president of Presales Mastry. It's hard to be a buyer when it comes to demo solutions. It's a crowded landscape. There's lots of new tech, tons of various terminology. So understanding what goes into the space is easier said than done. In this session, we're going to break down the various types of demo technology, who plays where, and what use cases are best suited for each one. Gentlemen, I'm going to leave it to you. If you have questions from the audience, please put it in the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer them. But over to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Avidan, great to see you. Or Gilad, sorry, I'm calling you by your last name.
It's okay. Yeah. It's not worse.
I've done worse too. That's good. So it's super exciting time, like Nick mentioned, to be in the demo solution space. Small anecdote, when Chris White and I published the Presales Buyer's Guide back in April, I think there were fewer than 10 vendors in this space. And of those, all but maybe one or two had only been around for about a year or so. Now there's north of 25 vendors. So lots more out there, slew of new products coming out, lots of new functionality that continues to really rapidly evolve, which is helping to address an ever widening array of use cases for us in pre-sales. But like Nick mentioned, the challenge with that rapid change is it's not really always clear what technologies are available, how they work, or even which use cases they best address. And so, Gilad, maybe we can start by exploring sort of three of the biggest challenges that these solutions tend to help with and how they're typically addressed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as a founder, just this space being so underserved for so long is just crazy. And now suddenly there's this explosion in them. I really love being in this space. I do have some slides that we can show, just talking a little bit about the different solutions. If that's okay, we can get started with that.
Go for it.
So the way that that we love to think about it is that there's three main things right now in the market, products that challenges that are being solved. And the first one is really what I think most people are familiar with, which is the Ping-Pox product tours. So lots of tools to make these mostly step-by-step guides that you can embed on a website or share as a leave behind after a call. Some people are sharing them top of funnel in emails. And essentially it's like screenshots that you stitch together, and it's a cool interactive demo of your product. And that's, I think, what most people are familiar with. And then there's a second category that got started last year, which is demo environment cloning. And that's where you create a separate, stable demo environment that works like a clone of your production environment. So it's always on, and you can also edit it to tell a story. And then there's this third newer category that's kind of layering edits on top of a real app, your existing demo environment. So that allows you to give a demo with real-time data and overlay edits on top to add some storytelling or tailoring to it. You want to dive into them one by one? We could go a little deeper.
Yeah, why don't we do that? And obviously there are other use cases here, and we'll address some of those as we go through. But why don't we start with the guided demos or product tours, which people are probably most familiar with because most of the vendors in this space fall into the category of providing these types of solutions. So why don't we start there?
Sure. So one second. So this is an example of what a product tour is. So it's kind of like this guide and you have balloons on top. Some people do without balloons, so it simulates the product a little bit closer. I just wanted to add this example here, so people who don't know what it is. Let's go next. So product tours, the challenge is really, how do we create these product assets, and how do we make them quickly? Everybody can, make a video or slides or something. This is kind of something a little bit, taking to the next level. And you can definitely share them and put them on the website. It's almost like a good way to bring the product earlier in the conversation, a good entryway into PLG, and it can also be used to support a sales motion. You can use as leave behinds. The way that the tech works is actually quite straightforward. you take your production environment, or it could even be in a different product altogether, and you have something to take screenshots. These are like HTML screenshots, so you can edit the text and stuff inside later. And you can take them one by one, and you almost like lay them out like a slideshow. And all these tools look kind of like slideshow editors. And then when you have all those slides, which are screenshots, and you edit them to make it like tell a little bit of more of a story, you can stitch them together and edit them to make them kind of go into each other, almost like an animated slide deck. You can add balloons and guidance on top, there are a lot of different options actually in this space. So it is I think the first one that was available maybe in like 2020. I think the first ones came around, and now there's just a lot of them. Obviously the big ones on top, but lots of different options, different price points, different feature sets, and I think anybody can find something that they like here in this category.
Yeah, there's certainly options, not just in terms of the vendors that are out there, but also the approaches that some of the vendors are taking towards this, right? So, there may be screenshots, it may be stitching together videos, even in the different sort of tour guidance that each step has, they can include images and videos. So it really does, as you said, help a lot of more enterprise organizations that otherwise wouldn't be able to put themselves out there in sort of product-led growth motions, get the product into prospects' hands faster, which really is what we want to do. We want to align with buyer expectations, which is show me a product today. Too often, unfortunately, those demo call to actions or getting demo call to action buttons on the website, what do they typically do today? They lead into a qualification call. And then they lead into, if you pass that, well, maybe we're going to go have discovery first, and then we'll decide we're going to put you on a demo with someone to show you live product. Not terribly aligned to what buyers are expecting. So these tools really let you push out the product top of funnel really, really effectively. They have a whole slew of other benefits as well. Things like getting better organic stakeholder discovery. We know that today, buying organizations or buying committees keep getting bigger. Latest numbers I saw from Gartner were that the average buying committee is north of 20 people in some cases these days. But often we're only talking to a very small subset of that. And the ability to share these assets or have the prospects share these assets internally gives organizations the ability to understand who else is actually on the buying team before they've been introduced to them. The other benefit, which is really helpful, and these different tools address this to different varying degrees, is getting analytics in terms of what's being viewed. So not just who's viewing something and how long they're spending viewing it, but what particular screens are they spending the most time on? And what that does is facilitates the pre-sales teams having much more meaningful conversations when they do finally get to a live conversation, because we understand more about exactly what that buyer is looking for and what's important to them, and can come to the table having much better prepared to address those particular concerns. So lots of really interesting things that these tools can start to surface.
For sure. I mean, when you're a seller and you go into that next call and you already know 5, 6 other names that have looked at the asset, and you know exactly what each of them is looking at, and it's all, going back into your Salesforce or whatever CRM you're using, that's just like making that much better at that next call.
Yeah. The only thing I think is worth calling out is there's a fairly obvious, or maybe it's not obvious, commercial side benefit for pre-sales orgs, and that is, because these particular solutions tend to focus mostly on top of funnel use cases, very often we're finding marketing is involved in the purchase, and marketing budget is often being involved in actually funding these solutions, where we're in a typical situation where pre-sales often doesn't have their own unique budget, except in some of the largest organizations. Getting access to other budget, where like marketing that tends to have lots, helps get these tools actually implemented a lot sooner than they might otherwise be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess sometimes this would be more of a product marketing purchase that pre-sales uses versus like, how do you see that usually?
Yeah, agreed. So why don't we take the next step and take a look at the next one, which is the what you refer to as sort of the cloning technology. I know there's a couple different approaches to how that's done. Can you walk us through a little bit of sort of what that looks like?
Sure. So the second type of product in this space that this has started maybe, it's all pretty new. So this started maybe in 21, is cloning. And that really, speaks to, I have a demo environment, but I need to take it and scale it. I want it to be up all the time. I want it to be fast. I want to scale it to more people. I want to edit some of the details there. And I really want to take control of that demo environment. The tech there is a little bit more complicated in depth. The way that it works, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth with that, just because I think it's requires a little bit more explanation than the first one, is that you take your production environment and then you go ahead and create a clone of it, and that clone is acting like your real demo environment. And we'll get into that in a second. But it looks and it behaves like your real environment, but it is disconnected from the real one. So it's almost like a snapshot in time of the real thing, but it's disconnected. So that's why we call it a clone. And then you can apply edits on top because it's always there. It's static. It's stable. You can edit it and change it, and you can tell a much better story because of it. And this one is speaking as a CPO, I can tell you that the technology here in this space is the most complex because essentially what you're doing is you're simulating a backend. You're running the app with a simulated backend. It's pretty hard to do, and that's why I think there's a lot less players in this space. And I would expect less players in this part of the market.
And so we'll get a little bit more into the tech in a second here, but what would you say are some of the main benefits of using cloning over, say, a product tool?
To me, it's, if I'm a seller or if I'm in pre-sales and I'm doing a demo, I want to do it with the real product. It needs to feel like the real product. It needs to look like the real product. I need to be able to pivot from screenshots. I mean, you can work on screenshots and work on slides that are extremely high fidelity if you put enough work, but it's never going to feel like the real product. Not all the buttons are going to work. You want it to be real, and you want it to feel real. And I think most sellers that I talk to, they would never try to demo on a live call from slides. And this gives you the ability to really expand the number of people in your org or even outside of your org that can do a live demo, because you can give them a copy of your environment where, one, it's always on, it always works, and it's always the same. And two, they can't break anything because it's a clone. So if your product, you can send an email by mistake or delete something by mistake, or you can make a transaction, send money to somebody by mistake. You can't really give that to your partners overseas to demo. But with this, you can do that. And that's like a superpower. It's amazing.
Yeah, huge benefit there. I do want to call it too that, so there's a couple of options. We're going to get to the other one in a second or after this about sort of live demos and enhancing them. That's a huge point. But I want to get back to the demo environment challenge as well, and just call it the obvious that a lot of the times Presales doesn't even own the demo environments, and we're at the mercy of a cloud team or somebody else. And so often those groups don't necessarily work at the speed of sales, where we need to spin up a new instance immediately because we're going to demo, tomorrow or the next day, or even things like persistency of your demo models. If you're doing complex proof of concepts or you're building a customized demo and you need to show that again 3 months from now because you've got 6, 9, 12-month sales cycles and they get spread out, a lot of the time there's a persistency issue where there's only so much space that each demo can take up on the demo environment. So it's only the latest ones in the last 2 weeks, and then they get flushed. And it's almost impossible in some cases to even bring them back later on. So there's a whole lot of challenges around the fact that we don't always own the demo environment. And the nice thing about cloning is it removes all of those variables, because now
it's just there.
Yeah, it's just there. We're using the vendor's demo environment, which has none of those challenges.
Yeah, that's right. You want to go a little bit deeper into the tech just for time's sake?
Yeah, let's explore how the tech actually works.
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting. Like, and to really get it and get a good intuition on what can't be done with a clone, let's take a step back for a second and look at web apps and kind of how they work. And this is going to be really high level. So we can get through it in a couple of minutes. So the way a web app works is like it's different from a phone app where you download an app. In the web, you just type in a URL and all the data that you need to show that app and use it kind of gets downloaded on the fly. The app is kind of bootstrapped from all of these, from this backend. And what's a backend? A backend is like a group of servers where you're getting all of the stuff that you need. So if it's like an e-commerce app, then the static files are going to be the logo, the fonts, the HTML, all the different designs from the website. These are like always the same until the app gets updated, but it's just static files. And then when you want to like, after the app loads, you want to like get the list of all the products or do a search or buy something or do all of that stuff, all of the logic layer, that's going to be your API. And you're going to be making requests back and forth from this API to be doing things. And then you also have all these third-party services that, like nobody's really building their own app completely these days. If you have a map, it's probably Google Maps or Mapbox or something like that. If you have to do credit card billing, you're talking to Stripe, you're talking to something else like that. BI tools, most of the customers in the space, people in the space, your product is complex, all these charts and stuff. You're using partners and APIs and lots of stuff, in the backend. So the backend is actually really complex. But the front end is always the same. It's a web browser that's just downloading all these files and making these requests. So that's how like a web app works at a really high level. So how do you kind of make a clone of this? So it turns out it's actually the approach itself at a high level is really simple. The cloner is a proxy that sits between the front end, the browser, right, and all the servers at the back end. So every time the web app makes a request, like for example, for the logo, it goes through the cloner, then the back end returns the logo, and the cloner just takes that request and response and saves it into the clone. You can think of it as like reference traffic or like a sample of traffic. Almost like if you hear a conversation in a different language, you can take all the requests and responses and kind of have a reference of how different things are said in that language. So it's almost like the same thing here. When you get a sample for every request, what the backend would have responded, then you can almost simulate that, because when you go then in playback, this is when you're showing the demo. The web app works exactly the same, but it's thinking that it's talking to the real backend, but actually it's talking to the cloner. When the web app makes a request, the cloner then, instead of going to the real backend, it's looking at the reference traffic, the clone, and seeing if it has seen a request like that during the cloning process. And if it has, it returns the response. And there's lots of details in this, but essentially, for example, if you want to make a report, you want to show a report in the clone, what you do is like when you're cloning, make sure to make that report, make sure to do that search, make sure to perform that action or go to that page or do whatever. All that reference traffic is saved during cloning, and then in playback, you have that available. But if you want something that you didn't do, then you won't have it available. So that's like the other part of that. You can never have like a perfect all-encompassing clone, but the stuff that you did clone, you have that forever, and it's always going to be the same.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said too about a benefit of not necessarily cloning all the functionality, because to your point earlier about providing other folks in the organization, account execs, BDRs, et cetera, the ability to demo themselves, we often can't do that unless we're going to put guardrails around what they're able to demo. And so by not cloning certain things or by actually removing certain elements that we don't want them to be able to click on, we effectively put those guardrails in place and expand the capacity of our ability to demo live product.
Yes.
So what happens, what happens after we've done all the cloning? Is there a second step that we can take?
Yeah. So once you have all that data in there, then what you have is your web app working like it would in the real world, but it's inside of the clone. And then you can apply a layer of edits on top. So we have Demostack, for example, but others too in the space that we have an editor where you can kind of make those edits. And then when the data is being fetched or just before it's displayed, depending on the type of edit, you'll be able to see that. So for example, if you take a chart and you change it, all your web app around that chart is working the same way that it normally would, but that chart is going to be exactly like you wanted it to be. So this is how you can kind of make those edits on top of the clone.
Yeah, and
there's also obviously more stuff too. But that's the main part. Yeah.
Yeah, and so an obvious benefit to these sort of things is that now you can create a bunch of different clone demo environments for different personas, for different verticals, all with their own data sets, their own charts, et cetera, to help you start to tell much more effective stories. They're going to resonate better with the audience because they're seeing stuff that applies specifically to them.
For sure.
So this is cloning. But there's a third approach that we talked about earlier that's really exciting. It's probably the newest technology in this space. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how it works?
Yeah, so there is a new player, and it's kind of like almost like a middle ground between them in some ways. There's no like official name to it, but we call it here live demo storytelling. And really, what that is we call it internally, we call it overlay, but we'll talk about them in a second. So the idea here is that you can layer edits on top of your real app or your real demo environment in production. So if you want to demo something that has real-time data, cars moving around a map, or whatever it is that's real time, you want to ask the buyer a question and Google it for them live, and you want to demo that, then you can't really use a clone for that because the data is real time, it's updating all the time. So this kind of solution will allow you to almost like add a layer of edits on top of a live product with something like an extension or an app that takes your real app, kind of recognizes when there's text or images on the screen that need to be edited, and then applying those edits as a layer on top. I think I have a little graphic here. It's very simple, but really what it is running an app and having almost like a mask on top or an overlay of edits on top. And this is a new space. So even here, Salio really started doing this, I think, last year. And we're also now launching a product called Overlay because you're overlaying, edits on top. So Demostack Live or Overlay is what we're calling this product. And it's really an interesting kind of thing because with cloning, you couldn't really do anything that's with real-time data. And this kind of allows you to do that, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's because cloning, you have to sort of pre-populate the data ahead of time, and it's a little more static. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the sort of different use cases, like when would we use cloning versus the overlay? Yeah, so there is overlap between these two things because both of them are solutions that you would use on a live demo. And when I'm thinking of live demos, like what am I showing on the Zoom call, right? I'm screen sharing something, what am I showing? And it really comes down to, is it an environment challenge or is it a storytelling challenge? If it's an environment challenge, meaning you want to scale up your environment to 100 AEs, but your environment, you can't do 2 demos at the same time, for example. If you have something like that, and I know that there's plenty of people that have that problem, if you have a problem like that, then you have to use something like a clone, because then you can take all that complexity and kind of hide it away inside the clone, take the clone, give it to go-to-market, let them do whatever they want with it. With overlay, there's 2 advantages. One is that you can show real-time data. Your app is always up to date. You don't need to worry about that. It's showing real-time stuff. You can search for anything you want. There's no guardrails there. Pros and cons to it, right? Like you said, sometimes you do want those guardrails. But if you don't want them, then they're not there because it's just edits overlaid on top. And the second advantage is that it's a lot easier to set up. It's much, it takes a little bit of setup to make a clone work correctly because you're simulating the backend. So you need to teach the cloner how the backend works. And with overlay, you don't need to do that because it's just edits on top. But you can really use it to tell a cool story. And lots of products, their demo needs storytelling more than it needs an environment change. So that's when we have the 2 options. And are we finding that this is a sort of an either or type of situation for these 3 types of technological approaches for organizations, or are there situations where it makes sense to have a solution that can accomplish multiple different ways of sort of skinning this cat.
I mean, the way I see it is that you want all of them. It's not, you can start with one, you can continue to the others, but in the end, it's great to have something where you can combine all three. And I'll give you like an example. So say somebody's on the website, they want to sign up for a demo. You know, maybe until they can talk to a rep, you give them some tours to try out. Maybe in the scheduling email, you send them a tour. Then when they go, like in the meantime, while you wait for a demo, look at these tours and see kind of where you're interested. Also, by the way, the first rep that's going to talk to you, we're also going to get analytics on exactly what you looked at. So we already know what you're looking for. So we got some free discovery off of that. Then on the first call, you want to scale that as much as you can, right? You want to have a lot of people to be able to take that first call. Then you use a clone for that, because then you have like a clone. It's always the same. It's like the golden demo. You do that, use that demo either for discovery or just to kind of gauge interest, do all of that stuff. And then, you know, sometimes you want to show an integration. You don't want to clone the integration. You want to show like a little, some edits on top that's use overlay. Or maybe there's a part of your app where you're showing real-time logs or something that's happening in real time. And it's really impressive, those kinds of demos. And you can show that. Sometimes you want to be able to kind of switch between the different demos. On the call live, you know, lots of companies, their demos are like a few different demos combined into one, showing different packages or different products, kind of working together. An integration with Salesforce, you want to be able to show that too, and kind of hopping between them is pretty complex. And then after the call is done, you want to share a leave behind, right? So that's when you can go back to a tour, or you can send them a shared sandbox as leave behind, which is another big advantage of cloning. You can create a sandbox that's basically the clone. It's safe. You can share it out and add a layer of guidance on top. So if you have all three combined, that's when it gets really interesting and powerful.
Awesome summary. Yeah, I love the leave behind option for the sandboxes as well too, right? Instead of sending either just a PowerPoint deck or even the guided tour again, now we're actually getting them hands-on keyboard, but in a very controlled manner with one of the cloned sort of demos. So love that summary. Thanks so much.
Gentlemen, you ever been to a party and you don't want to go and talk to anyone because you're going to interrupt like a great conversation they're having? I feel that's what I'm doing right now.
Nick, you're never interrupting.
Well, I just wanted to say quickly, just some quick housekeeping here. We are about a minute away from starting the next session with Jamal Reimer and Chris White, where we're going to be talking about the dynamics between account executives and sales engineers, which is a key one. If you're not following Gilad or Kerry on LinkedIn, I suggest you remedy that, because obviously they are great follows. And of course, if you want more great content like this, definitely follow the Demostack LinkedIn page. Kerry, anything you want to wrap up with before we wrap up this session?
I want to thank Gilad for summarizing these new changes so well. I think hopefully we gave everyone a good sense of sort of where the tech is and where it's going, and at least a high level summary of what use cases might be addressed with each of these different approaches. But again, the market continues to change very rapidly, so stay on top of what's going on and follow both of us, and hopefully this is something that's coming to every pre-sales org in the near future.
Where else can our attendees find you, Kerry?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place, or presalesmastery.com.
Fantastic. And Gilad, anything before we wrap?
If you want to take a quick screenshot, we have this cool slide kind of summarizing everything. We'll also share it later. This is like just one slide explaining all the space, the tech, the use cases, and the key players. I think super valuable as a starting point.
This is great. I have a feeling this might be a few LinkedIn posts from maybe the entire Demostack team tomorrow. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Attendees, appreciate you. We're going to end this session and go right into the next one. So very exciting day here, Demo HQ Day at Demostack.
Thanks, guys.